Welcome to the TDS Early Years podcast. Now, each week we're going to be joined by different educational experts from across the globe who are going to offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help us as practitioners unlock all the potential for learning that there is in the early years. So to be first to hear about future episodes and to access all of the follow-up content, including ideas for your own setting, Pinterest, mood boards and loads more, you can sign up for exclusive access using the link in our podcast description. Hello everybody, my name is Alistair Clegg and I am your host for this week's TDS Talking Early Years podcast, and I'm an early years consultant, trainer and author. The first series of the TDS Talking Early Years podcast aims to explore the amazing adventures that children can have in outdoor learning in the early years. And I'll be talking to a number of global experts that we aim to use their knowledge to inspire your everyday work and unlock the potential of all of the great things that you do in your early years settings. I am delighted to introduce Ellen Sandseter, who is today's guest. Hello, Ellen.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I'm actually a huge fan of your work, so I am a little bit fanboying at the moment. It's going to be a pleasure to spend the next few minutes discussing your work around risky play. But for anybody that hasn't come across your work, could you just tell us a little bit about you, who you are and what you do?
Well, I am a professor within early childhood education in Norway, Trondheim in Norway, working at the Department of Physical Education and Health. Here. So I'm actually becoming preschool teachers or early childhood teachers. And my main, interest within research is risky play and children's risk-taking in play. So I have been trying to, see the positive side of children taking risks and not to, overprotect them.
In today's episode, we're going to be exploring how approaches to risky play have changed over the years and are still evolving, and also what that evolution means in terms of effective learning for children. So again, I think, Ellen, if I go back to my very early days of teaching, when we thought about outdoor play then, and I'm talking about in the early 90s, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but it was long enough ago. A lot of what we got was kind of indoor play taken outside. So you would get a water tray, some easels, maybe you get some construction on a rug, which might be something like G-Polo or Lego, so quite small stuff, a sandbox. And maybe you'd get some scooters and wheeled toys, but most of the stuff was quite sedentary, and there was a lot of idea that children rotated through activities outdoors. And I think where we're hoping to move early years practice to is this idea that outdoor play builds on a lot of the skills that children will have had from indoor experience, but it needs to be something different as opposed to indoors taken outside.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think that is something that depends on the teachers and practitioners' skills and knowledge. And I think if you haven't had a lot of outdoor focus on outdoor play, nature play, risky play in your teacher training, and also learn like practical skills on how to, be a practitioner outdoors. I think it's very easy just to take the indoor activities outdoor and then you think you're doing outdoor play. but it's really, really, really different. And like we talked about earlier, about the difference between the indoor space and the outdoor space. And if you're just taking indoor activities out in the outdoor space and kind of confining them in the same way almost as they were indoors, you're not adding anything for children to explore, for children to, develop. Yeah. So you need to think different. You need to think also that, or a knowledge, or take advantage of the fact that you have a larger space, so you could actually let children, use their bodies in other ways. You could have larger equipment and, also use nature if you have that. So that's really important. I've been a visitor to many, many outdoor or forest schools or outdoor preschools in other countries. and that are inspired by the Scandinavian way of doing it.
Yeah.
But what they actually do is just to take indoor activities, indoor equipment outside, and then they think they're doing outdoor school or forest school, and that's not. I don't think it's adequate.
And it's not letting children explore the element of risk. So I suppose practically for people that are listening, it would be about saying, well, if, for example, we're thinking about construction, and again, regardless of the size of your space, if you wanted the children to explore the basic skills of construction with a smaller scale resource, and you're going to explore things like blocking and stacking and bridging and all of those kind of things. When you think about construction outdoors, we're then thinking about things like, if we can get our hands on them, logs, pallets, things that aren't flat, things that don't necessarily balance, where you might take 2 people or 3 to be able to move something as opposed to being able to move it on your own. So it's saying, what do I know my children do indoors, and how do I make it different? So ideally, when we're talking about water play and exploration in an outdoor space, it's not just about having a water trough with some boats in it. It's about moving water over distance, stemming the flow of water, being able to transport water, lift, carry, wheel, whatever it may be, pour. Yep. So all of those basic indoor skills, but you're ramping them up a bit to involve an element of prior knowledge, but new experience through risk-taking and its various forms that really allows you to engage in something that's different in an outdoor space.
Yeah.
And then as adults, it's kind of recognizing that, I think. And then, as we talked about in our first episode, being able to create an outdoor environment that's ambiguous enough and open-ended enough for children to be able to explore it, as well as having some key hooks in it that allow children to engage in it.
Yeah, and the best opportunity for doing that is outdoors, because indoors it's much more limited the opportunities to do that. So I mean, taking advantage of a big outdoor space, of seasonal changes, for instance, when it's raining, why don't you take advantage of all the water that comes down from the sky and make water play out of that? In Norway we have a lot of snow, so in the winter the playground looks completely different and can be used in completely different ways. But then we take advantage of the snow. So and there's wind and there's sun and there's a lot of nature elements and outdoor materials that you could use.
Yeah, which is a gift. And I think a lot of people listening to this will be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but in my setting, in my school, my manager, my senior leader, I mean, one school I worked in which had a lovely hill, grassed hill, and a huge piece of grass, but the children weren't allowed on it between the months of kind of October and March because it got too muddy and they walked mud into the carpet and the cleaner used to go mad because there was a muddy carpet. So you are often fighting, I get, some of our listeners will be fighting against that. Well, it's all well and good, but my setting won't allow me to do that because of the kind of element of risk. And even things like, we'll often sit indoors with children. Often in the UK at the beginning of the day, part of the morning routine is to say, what's the weather like today? And it always makes me smile because, you could be outside in the weather, experiencing it on your face. And you're sitting inside in a heated room saying, if I look out the window, it looks a bit windy. So sometimes for practitioners, it's about challenging some of the nonsense that we do because we've always done it and think, actually, how does that impact on the development of my children in terms of that ability to take risk and experience the world in terms that they can understand it and not through the eyes of an adult?
But we do have those discussions in Norway too. But it always should end with one very, very important question: is this good for the children or is it not? And if it's good for the cleaners and not for the children, I think the answer is easy. So I mean, if you have a childcare center or a preschool, your main objective is to create spaces and opportunities for children to experience high well-being, to promote their development, for them to learn new skills and to be happy and, make friends with other children and all those things, which is really, really important in childhood. And that should be the main aim, not if the cleaner is happy or not. Then you have to find solutions for that.
Yeah, and it's that kind of politics of adulthood, isn't it, that really do impact on children, I mean, the world over. And also, I think the acceptance that for all of us as practitioners, we bring to our practice our own personal learning preference.
Yep.
So often I will talk to practitioners, and I've had to confront this in my own practice over the years, about how you either facilitate or stop play that doesn't fit in with your particular preference or pedagogy. I mean, again, fairly recently, I was within an early year setting where there was a spider in the sink, and the adult was quite afraid of the spider. I didn't like the spider, but the children were hugely engaged by the spider.
Yeah.
But in the end, the spider got taken out by the site manager and let free, because the adult was just like, I really don't like spiders. And we just had a really interesting conversation around, I know you don't like spiders, and I'm not trying to, undermine your phobia that you've got, but the children's engagement was massive. Yeah. So it's about, can you recognize your own learning preferences,
yeah,
and if they are compromising your children's learning. And a bit about risk is about our own risk level, and therefore do we impose that on children? If we've got a really high one, are we saying to all our children, go on, get out there, just do it? But if we've got really low risk tolerance, are we stopping children from just exploring what they should be exploring?
Yeah, and I think a lot of teachers and practitioners are doing that because they don't know how to handle it. Not because because it's their own fear that comes true. It's not because children are afraid, or even they might not be a high possibility that children would be injured, but it's because the adult is afraid. And I've been interviewing a lot of teachers and practitioners about this, and usually where they are able to handle it, they would be quite aware of their own, sensation-seeking, risk-seeking level themselves. So they would have been talking about it. So in a staff group, there would be, as I said, we are different, and you would probably have some really, really low risk seekers, and you would have some that would be more like higher risk seekers. And then just to know which one you could ask sometimes to kind of take over the situation. I'm afraid I don't want to, stop the children or restrict them, or, be the reason that they're not allowed to do this because they think it's fun and they need it. And then find someone else from the staff to kind of take over the situation. And when you have kind of a dialogue about that, and you know the other staff, they usually find good ways of dealing with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's also about, as a team, talking about it, because risk is really important. Again, the setting that I work with, I was standing with another adult outside watching. It was two girls with some milk crates, and they were really cleverly stacking them so that one made a step and then they got higher, then they made another step and they got higher. And so it got to the point where there were maybe 6 crates high, and one little girl stood on the top, and the crates were wobbling and she was wobbling. And we, both the adult and I, were watching this in silence. And she wobbled a bit, and then she sat down on the top, and then she climbed down again. And I just said to the adult, how did you feel about that? And she said, honestly, if you hadn't been here as a early years consultant, I would have been saying, get down. And actually, what I learned was, she got as high as she wanted to be. She felt really uncomfortable, so then stopped and then came back down. But I was glad I didn't stop that, but I would have done. So I think it's good to have those discussions where you're saying, that did make me feel uncomfortable, but actually on reflection, it was okay. Yeah. Or that made me feel uncomfortable because rightly so, it was an uncomfortable situation.
And that's also a very good point, because I have also a couple of stories about practitioners actually employing rules for themselves on not to intervene as soon as their instinct tells them to. So I had a student some years ago, and she was an older student. So usually I have, people in the 20s.
Yeah.
It was a 56-year-old woman. She did her teacher training that, like, you know, late in life. So she was a grandmother, and she told me she felt that she had become more and more, you know, afraid of what children do, and for if children should be injured. So when she had her practical periods here, so our students go out and have like weeks of practice out in preschools to work, she was always really anxious about children getting injured or, you know, hurting themselves and things like that. And then in her last practical period, she came to me, and then we had been teaching her about risky play, and she said, well, I think I've learned or found out one of the most, you know, important things for me to function as a practitioner, as a teacher, when I start working, and that is to have glue in my pockets. And I was, well, what do you mean glue in your pockets? Yes, when I see some children doing something risky, I stick my hands in my pockets and I pretend that I have glue in my pockets. So when I instinctively want to, you know, intervene in what they're doing, I can't get my hands out of my pockets. Then I have to, you know, wait for some seconds. And I think also I was also in a preschool in Toronto one time, and they had what they call the 17-second rule, which is similar, so that you wait a little while until you intervene, and you don't act on your instincts as soon as you get them. And usually everything, and the student told me, I mean, it hasn't been necessary for me to intervene even one time, because it's always resolved by the children themselves. They find a way out, like the girl you described. If you don't intervene, they usually find a way to handle it, and they find a way out of the situation themselves.
And if they can't, they will ask for support, and that's when the adult can step in. I love the idea of glue in your pockets. And I also think that's an excellent place to just end this episode, because in the next episode, what we're going to talk about is any hints and tips and ideas about how we can have a more relaxed approach, or how we can help our teams have a more relaxed approach to that kind of risk management. But once again, taking away the idea of putting glue in your pockets, obviously metaphorically, not literally. Brilliant. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.
All it leaves me to do is to say a huge thank you to our guest, Ellen, for joining us and providing such valuable and interesting insights. So you've been listening to the TDS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Clegg, and Ellen Sandseter. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, and I'm sure you have, don't forget that you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access all of the exclusive follow-up content, which includes ideas for your setting and Pinterest boards that will help you to shop resources that are really good for learning through risk.